Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Welcome in, Arizona Cardinals fans. It is the Redbird Reboot podcast. We're coming to you on a Saturday following a maybe surprising for some Cardinals victory. They're now playing the Miami Dolphins and the return of Tua Tagovailoa tomorrow. And there's been a lot of questions this week still surrounding this team, especially looking at another defensive line injury and more questions surrounding Drew Petzing and that Arizona Cardinals offensive structure. I'm Blake Murphy. You can, of course, obviously follow us on what used to be twitter.com, now X. And, of course, over there is the co-host of the show at Pancakes, Marcos Labrada. Marcos, Cardinals fans said this was a must-win game. They went out and they made it a must-win game, kicking a field goal with no time left on the clock, essentially beating the Chargers at their own game. I think we could agree that there was knowledge that this team could win this game, but to go out and then beat the Chargers at their own game, get a little luck on their side, it made a lot of Cardinals fans feel pretty good, at least, although the inconsistencies have for sure been pretty maddening to follow as a fan.
I think last week I said that I didn't see them losing 2 games in a row. And when it comes to like the big stage, especially this year, it seems like this team likes to take us on for the ride of like, hey, we're not going to tell you if we're a bad or that. We're just going to surprise you guys, because there's been surprising wins in San Francisco. There's been surprising wins, of course, against Los Angeles. And I think it's how a certain great Baldy breakdowns or Baldy said, if we played California teams the rest of the year, we'd probably go into the playoffs and whatnot, because we seem to have their number. So I feel good about that. I've always been a person.
We're undefeated again.
Yeah, we're undefeated against, California. And usually the California teams are the ones that are just like a thorn in our side. So far, so good.
Yes, absolutely. The biggest thing I think, at least, was let's go through and break down the game. So I was actually at this game. I get to be able to usually try to pick one game a year to go to, or I'm able to have that opportunity, which is awesome. This was one of those games where most Cardinals fans who actually go and visit the stadium, Monday nights and Thursday nights are just tough. Even Sunday night games are arguably better, because you've got the home traffic that's happening. There's people going out to get groceries and shopping. There's just a ton of traffic. Takes extra time to get into the stadium. So by the time we got into the stadium with the first drive, at least for the most part, just kind of take a look up, and it's like the ball has already seemingly been turned over. There's an interception, at least, where Kyler's hitting a check down to James Conner. I believe it was Tart, for the most part, at least, who ended up picking the ball off. A defensive end, or a defensive tackle, no less, dropping back into coverage, as Khalil Mack at least got his hand up, forced the tipped ball, essentially. And then James Conner just runs up behind the guy, punches the ball out. Michael Wilson recovers it. So you end up essentially going backwards for a couple of yards at the end of the day. Just kind of wild how that turned out. Cardinals end up going 3 and out after that, which is just unfortunate, at least, where James Conner had a nice run. The Cardinals try to pass twice, punt it back. Chargers themselves end up going, at least, and they make it look pretty overall easy. Jalen Reagor goes deep on a pass play. Justin Herbert hits him. The wide receiver play for the Chargers in this game, Marcos, came up to be a big issue, whereas it was similarly a big issue for Arizona. The way the run defenses actually responded to each other was the difference in the game, as was, I would argue, this essentially turnover. The Chargers are at the 44-yard line of Arizona. The Kyler Murray interception, they're at least within field goal range. So you're talking about a probable at least 10, if not 14-point swing with those 2 fumbles at least being forced. Jalen Thompson recovers, and essentially it ends up being like a change of possession crossing into the end zone. the lack of receiver help that the Chargers gave Justin Herbert, Lad McConkey, who had his ups and downs. He had some plays he was actually playing pretty well, was able to get open, make some big catches. There's other plays where he just dropped what should have been an easy play and ended up making a essentially drive stalling error for Herbert and that offense. What were some of your thoughts about how when this game began, Marcos? Because going in, we knew these two teams would be physical, but I don't know if we expected it to be that physical from the first quarter moving on to the rest of the game.
Well, like, I see a lot of heart from this team. So one of the things that I had tweeted about is I tweeted about, like, the defense not only overcame their whatever issues they had when it comes to being able to defend, like, at least keep him out of the end zone, because the passing defense was just bad, but they kept them out of the end zone. They limited them to, I believe, 5 field goals. So they kept them out. It's a classic bend but don't break defense, where you're just bending but you're not breaking and allowing like touchdowns, which would have been a massacre at that point of the Cardinals had they allowed touchdowns, because then we wouldn't even be close to this game. So they gave our chance to be able to like win and whatnot. But then you had the heart and soul of the offense and James Conner making 2 key plays. One of the plays is one of my favorite things that they do with James Conner, which I had brought up that like that used to be something they used to relegate to like Trey McBride, and I wish they caught more of these. But the under center fake handoff, and then the dump off, which I learned from Kurt Warner's video that everybody's talking about, that it's designed to hit two reads. It's either you hit Marvin Harrison Jr. on a deep dig, or you're gonna dump it down low. And of course, you dumped it down low, you got a 33-yard gain off of it, because he ran for his life on that one. He was able to get into like pretty easy position after that. We knew we were going to win the game after that. But that punch out, just to see him run down that defensive tackle, who, by the way, the defensive tackle, like, you're not going to score that touchdown. Why are you running with it so loose? It's like you gave yourself a position and you gave an easy out for like, hey, I'm running and I'm thinking I'm going to score this touchdown. You're not scoring the touchdown. They're going to catch up to you. So good on us for being able to capitalize on a mistake and seeing James Conner just come from behind and punch that ball out. And like, I felt like, I don't know how you feel about this, and you were there with the atmosphere, and you must have heard the crowd roaring. You said you were coming in at that time. But to hear the crowd roar after that, like, I feel like that was like the momentum changer at the beginning of the game that we needed. So I'm not sure if like how you felt about that, like with the atmosphere around you. But how were people like? How was it in the building when you saw that happen?
Yeah, so the section that I was in, we were on essentially like there's the home side, which is usually going to be more on the west side of the stadium, the away side, just between the decks for the most part. The biggest area was that Chargers fans kind of came into the game at 3-2 against the 2-3 Arizona Cardinals team, and it seemed like they were expecting to go to 4-2. And so after the first game, what it looked like, honestly, was the Chargers seemed like they had, for lack of a better term, their coaching, to begin with, at least on the, shall we say, defensive side of the ball, with some of how they played, some of the coverages, just how they were able to effectively limit Arizona in the passing game. It's almost like when we came into this matchup, it's like the Chargers we're number one in run defense. They're going to try to throw the ball on us because they can't run it on us. So we're going to essentially try to engineer to stop this passing game, make sure that we're kind of playing these guys whip and being physical with them. We've seen that on film. The Cardinals receivers have struggled this year as far as not just getting off of some of it, but the routes that they've been able to at least been given have allowed defensive backs to kind of be able to get in and jam them, or you're having these timing issues where they're able to kind of get back and interfere with them a bit late. So a lot of Chargers fans were thinking, we'll come in, run over Arizona, and Nick Rallis and that defense, they essentially did a fantastic job. Their linebackers, as far as being able to fill the gaps and holes, they plugged up the middle of the defense, and there was a huge difference in the speed of James Conner and J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins, he had one run for 11 yards. It's like the one time that he broke outside in that zone. But other than that, Arizona, the play that they had from the edge rushers, at least, actually was able to keep the offensive tackles in. And when the Chargers needed to throw the ball, they basically sent it to the tight ends. So you ended up seeing, I think that there was no wide receiver who led the Chargers in receiving yards. It was Will Dissly with 8 catches for 81 yards who did on a couple of big passing plays, some over the middle. But the other thing that stood out was we got to really see kind of the issues. And this is where I'm talking about offense as a whole. If you're going to be an all receiving team that's not built with a great offensive line, doesn't have a great running back, you're going to be talking about having to throw the ball 40 to 50 times a game, trying to catch up. You won't be able to kind of take time off the clock whatsoever. If you're talking about a run heavy team that's able to run the ball effectively, but doesn't have any wide receivers, and so you're having to kind of make these shorter passes to the bigger tight ends. Chargers ultimately did not take advantage and made several mistakes. There were several holding calls. There were some other penalties that took place where they got pushed back behind the sticks. And they didn't have an opportunity to just take a lead over Arizona and be able to catch up. They didn't even score a touchdown in the entire game, Marcos. They ended up kicking 5 field goals. At the end of the day, the biggest thing that was watching the two teams was counting down. It would go, all right, so you've got time is going 2, 3, no one's open. Herbert. Oh, he gets away for a second and then sacked. Oh, Herbert goes there. Oh, he throws it and it's a miss. The front 4 for the Cardinals actually played very well in this game by being able to key in on stopping the run up front early and then being able to, with 4, they didn't have to blitz extra. They didn't end up, there's a couple times they did blitz on a 3rd and long where I believe there was a long pass completed to the tight end 2 that I remember where I looked at and said, there they're firing 6. There, a guy just ran into it and was open. Boom. So it was like you kind of gambled, you rolled the dice, and you lost if you're Nick Rallis there. But for the most part of the game, Marcos, they played well enough that they were able to get pressure on Justin Herbert with 4, and the lack of guys who were able to get open with the Cardinals then having 7 in coverage. That really, to me, was the big difference in the game. And then it came down to executing the plays, and we got to see Kyler Murray and James Conner with their legs were able to carry what was essentially a weak passing attack with only 145 yards through the air. Probably another 55 or so, I would say, getting to 200 yards came from penalties of pass interferences that were made by the Chargers, or in the case of Marvin Harrison Jr., a drop that he then was kind of speared into that added an additional 15 yards. The best way to kind of put it is that Chargers both fumbled this game as far as luck kind of didn't go their way with those early fumbles, but the Cardinals also stepped up, were the more physical team and seized it, which I know we talked about, Marcos. The question wasn't whether or not the Cardinals could do that. It was, we're not sure if they would do it because it's 1 week they can't stop the Packers. The next week, you just, all right, Cardinals get the ball back. They're down by 1 point. Most people felt pretty confident in that situation. Arizona's going to drive down the field, kick a field goal and score to be able to win the game, that they had kind of managed the game properly.
Yeah, the defense was obviously what carried this win and whatnot, and I agree with you on that. I have my thoughts about like the offense because I've been watching this offense, and the thing that comes to my mind is meat on the bone. So, am I going to say that Drew Petzing is completely like at fault? No, I'm not going to say that because there are some plays where he is calling stuff that like other teams in the league do call. They call like I believe it's called smash concepts, which is what stretches out like the cloud corner on one side. We always use that term cloud corner. It just means the guy who's a flat defender. His job is to jam at the line of scrimmage and then like kind of play
and then jump back in his zone. Yeah. Essentially what your goal is to disrupt them, get them physically off the route. So that way there's no quick passing play that you can hit on a hot route. Then you jump back into your zone where you're watching the eyes on the quarterback, which then of course, like you said, is allowing them to then come back to be able to make plays on the ball. And the receivers, for what it's worth, at least, whether it's with these routes or concept, Marcos, like you're like this cloud coverage, it's the Vic Fangio style of defense, and Arizona has not been able to figure out a consistent way to beat it.
Yeah, well, there's the whole shot between the safety and the corner. So basically, you have the corner underneath, you have the safety over the top, and then you have that middle part where you're supposed to try to catch, like, do some sort of like a conflict. You want to get as many conflict. You want to get as many defensive backs in conflict. You got to make them choose which one or not. And there is one good play where I will say where this turned out well. And I thought to myself the same kind of thing, the general thing that Kurt Warner was saying in his video. But so calling this smash concept, and I could be, don't verify me on this, because I could be completely wrong on what the concept could be called. But you have one in the flat, you have one running a kind of like a little, like a deep corner, like a intermediate corner and whatnot. And then you're trying to get that, like, hey, is he going to come down to defend the flat, or is he going to, back off and defend, the deep route? If he takes a deep route, you take the flat. If he defends the flat, then you take the corner off to the side. So there's like concepts that are called that a lot of other teams they do run. One of the key things that I did bring up that I did see from that, it is the footwork. So the footwork, to me, like he kept saying that Kyler's set sometimes too early, and then he runs through he runs through every single receiver that he's supposed to target from 1 to 4 too quickly. And sometimes like a receiver could be like, it could take a hitch and then the receiver becomes open off the break and whatnot. So that's a timing based thing. I think this is what's happening. So he had a different timing set footwork with Cliff Kingsbury. Cliff Kingsbury ran the air raid. Of course, he came from the air raid offense. So you do know, like we talked about this, they're quicker concepts, quicker throws for the majority of the part. Not saying that he doesn't have any long developing plays, but there are more like quicker time-based throws where Kyler Murray's more used to just like two steps, 3 steps, no hitch, ball has to come out. This guy's going to come open. On this type of offense, which was a Drew Petzing one, and I kept preaching this a year ago. Think
footwork is totally different. At least for the most part, is part of that. I know, at least it's like resetting your brain.
Because didn't Drew Petzing say that he has to step off of a different foot? I do remember him talking about it in the press conference, and it's true. Instead of leading with his left foot, he's leading with his right foot, or it was vice versa. So they're doing different things, and that's a fine detail that can change a lot of the timing-based routes that these guys have to run. So, like, but then again, like, this is where, like I say, this is what what you have with Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray also has big playability with his feet. We saw it. He scored a touchdown with it. That was a scramble play. That was not by design, obviously. And he gambled on it, and the gamble won. He said, I'm going to make this guy miss because there's nobody on the left side of the field. And if I get past this guy, I'm in. And he did. You were there. Like, how excited were people seeing that? Were you excited? Were you jumping up like crazy when you saw him just basically like taking himself, make that guy miss? And then he didn't even like sprint end zone. How'd you feel about that?
Yeah, it was fun because it was one of those places where you didn't realize it was coming. You know that you needed a big play. And like we said, when he ran around that corner, for the most part, a lot of what we saw, at least in the game, was that the offensive line, as far as it came to pressure, he would get some time in the pocket, but essentially after a little while, they were just good enough with the coverage downfield, where eventually what he did on that play was he kind of ran to the corner, and then the safety, I think, who's there, they had Junior Colson, who's a rookie linebacker. He takes a bad angle on Murray. Murray just kind of scampers around to the outside, and then there was safety had moved essentially to the, I think it was boundary side of the field versus field side, which of course is, that's the one where when the ball is snapped, you've got the boundary side over here. Field side is going to be the opposite side of those two hash marks. So the safety had moved over to the other side because they had loaded everyone up on that side. So the only person who really was watching the quarterback was going to be the safety and Junior Colson. Kyler ran around the corner and then realized all of a sudden, there's no way the safety's going to catch me in time. He just kind of accelerated a little bit. Colson tried to make the tackle. It was not able to. And I was watching this going, okay, like that's one of those all the way back areas. And speaking of all the way back, that was something else that we noticed with James Conner was, for whatever reason, he seemed to be a step quicker in this game than he did in other games. And some of that at least is kind of reflected in where Arizona did really well with him and James Conner as being the guys to run the ball. Now, on the other side, there were some issues that we did still get to see with players on some of the offensive side. When Isaiah Adams came in at the guard spot, he did not do well. And what we've said is from continuation of preseason, as far as run blocking goes, he's probably one of the better ones on the team. I think that he finished with I want to say it was the highest graded in PFF. Yeah, highest graded pass run blocking on the team. Lowest graded for pass blocking, only just ahead of James Conner. So you're like, there's kind of where a rookie is. Like, here's his strengths, here's his weaknesses. The question is, can you improve enough as a run blocker, or can you do well enough as a pass catcher? I should say pass blocker to kind of get by. Really, what I think we've seen with this offense has been that a lot of these issues, I think we can look at it like Kurt Warner said, they're probably fixable. The question I think is going to be how much time are they fixable? How much adjustments is Drew Petzing going to make to have some of these quicker pass plays, getting guys more open? That I'm not sure of, Marcos, and it feels like in some cases we're going to really find out by the end of this season. Is Kyler and some of these changes, the adjustments for that one being held back because it's a young receiving core with maybe a more of an antiquated passing route offense and the keys in the run game, and how much of it is we kind of hit the limit of what Drew Petzing can do, and it really is coming down to James Conner to kind of make plays, and we really got to see that, I think, at the end of the game.
Here's the big play right here, and so I don't know how you feel about this from last year. I think I gave my thoughts about like this offense. I think I'm not. It's not so much saying I'm being validated for what I said about what Kyler Murray, what his strengths are. You maximize those, and if you fit him into a different offense, there could be situations where this is going to be kind of clunky or it might not work out. This is Oh, sorry. It was muted. I wasn't even like I didn't know it was muted this entire time. I'm over here talking and it's not saying that. But what I'm saying is like this big playability that he shows and these type of gambles that he's taking to be able to like, score a touchdown for 44 yards away. That's something that Kyler Murray is. And I think what needs to be maximized is you need to call a lot more designed runs and you need to trust them with being able to like make the reads to the outside, because if he got this type of speed that I don't think he had before, he's stronger now. He looks like he's stronger. This is where the big playability comes from. This is what needs to be maximized.
Totally. Yeah, no, I agree with you, Marcos. This is one of those plays where you talk about natural athletic ability and instincts, and you also talk about having 11 guys play on defense. Sorry, I should say offense there, which includes the quarterback as a rushing threat. You can see here in this coverage, they're basically ready to stop the pass. They have one guy who's covering the quarterback, and it's a mismatch. When they don't get him on that first rush, you have to be able to contain that edge and make sure that you're playing north well enough. And then the quarterback may cut back inside. But if he does, he's running into your safeties. He's running back into your other guys running down the field. And so this is just kind of a blown angle from Junior Colson here.
Yeah, there's nobody ahead of him. He read one side of the field on this concept right here. Like I said, the picture's muddied. The ball should come out at this point, and it's not going to come out because the picture is muddy. I'm not getting rid of this ball if I was playing quarterback back there. So I understand why Kyler Murray kind of read a half field, because he saw the closest defender to him is like 15 yards away. He took a gamble. He knew he was going to have to make this one guy miss. And if he made this one guy miss, I guarantee you he wasn't thinking like, hey, I'm going to go in for a touchdown. But because everybody's in, sticky man coverage, look at that. Everybody moves to one side of the field, and the field side, I believe, yeah, it's the field side was wide open with no defenders close to him. So I think, like I've been mentioning before, more running based concepts, like try to get him to like either make reads on the outside to take that ball out there, because in that situation they're going to call less man coverage calls, especially on what was this? What down was this? This is just 1st and 10. 1st and 10, they're calling man coverage on 1st and 10. Usually you see more man coverage calls on 3rd down. This is just a regular 1st and 10. They definitely weren't seeing this coming at all, but like that's one of the big differences of us winning the game. He got this touchdown because he took a gamble, and nobody's going to catch him because he's probably, I'm going to go ahead and say this, he's probably the best athlete here.
Yeah, I was going to say the biggest thing also too is when you're looking at the offense and how Jim Harbaugh's running his team, how he plays, a lot of times it'd be like, run, pass and 3rd down, having some other play actions dialed up. There were some drops, obviously, that hurt, but we really didn't get to see Herbert's athleticism. We didn't really get to see a lot of him being able to kind of take off and run. It was very much like the Greg Roman offense. What we've seen is that when it has talent, it's able to kind of produce, but it does hit a point when teams go, hey, we're going to take away the run. And unless you've got like a Vernon Davis or a George Kittle or someone like that at tight end, you're probably not going to be nearly as effective as, even that's happened with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has gone from essentially being, a quarterback that people are questioning, like, hey, he's like super dynamic, or he's an MVP this year, just been throwing for all these yards. And now this year, everyone's looking at him. It's like, hey, you added him Derrick Henry. He's got who knows what at wide receiver. Mark Andrews having a crappy year. He's just like blowing up with passing yards while Derrick Henry is running, 140 a game, because teams aren't able to stop those dual threats that you have with the legs of each of those. And it really does show also, I think, that Ravens went out, figured out what their issue was, brought in a guy who's known at Georgia and in the NFL, and Todd Monken, for being able to have these incredibly effective offenses where you could throw the ball super well, be able to produce enough on offense, and then recognizing that would be able to not open up stuff in the run game, but it was more of the idea of you could have a balanced approach where if teams would take one spot away, you could at least adjust and move it to another opportunity. What we see with Arizona is you take the run away, they're kind of done as an offense. Monken, I believe, was last in the NFL with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with like that Fitzmagic season where he started with. And then I know that he ended up taking on the Ravens job, but he had been back at Georgia as offensive coordinator for nearly won a championship. It really, I think, does showcase that there's positives that we've seen from Drew Petzing in this offense, but as far as the ability to adjust and have counter punches, this game, I think they did a great job of being able to at least design a running game that took advantage of the fact that there was no Joey Bosa on the edge. They were able to get some good screen passes in, had some timely penalties, but at the end of the day, it kind of came down to they managed the game well enough with that Kyler touchdown, like you had mentioned, that they were able to hold to a field goal, get that ball back, and then to kick that game-winning field goal. And so when you're saying what was the MVP of this game, the answer for me is it was Nick Rallis. Because Nick Rallis brings in this undermanned unit for the most part. We saw, obviously, Garrett Williams had a great game. We got to see some solid performance, but really the pass defense was very, very good. And the Cardinals were able to hold, I believe it was 11 carries for 40 yards for J.K. Dobbins, when I think I talked about and said, hey, my biggest concern, if they stop the run, great. That's awesome. They may have to sell out to stop the run. We'll see how those tight ends do. But I thought there was a good chance that if the Chargers got up by like a touchdown or so in Arizona, they would just try to run the ball down their throats. They didn't have the bodies back in the run game. And credit to Arizona, they at least were able to identify game plan for this offense very well. Guys in the middle of the field and even on the defensive line stepped up and made plays. There was 2 or 3 times that you would see only a gain of 2 or 3 yards on first down, and that limited the Chargers heavily into these 3rd and 8 scripts on 3rd down. This is where I think, Marcos, we can kind of see that, hey, yeah, there's been issues with the offense. It hasn't lived up to expectations. Kurt Warner and others are questioning like the design of the offense, even the broadcast. I didn't get to watch the game, obviously, but the broadcast team was going, hey, look, you got Marvin Harrison Jr., he's here. And there's, I believe, a statistic that was brought up at least by, I think it was Scott Barrett, unless I'm mistaken, who has a Fantasy Pros site, Scott Barrett DFB. He said, hey, if you're looking at Arizona, they have essentially 2 Marvin Harrison Jr.'s. The one is the guy who runs post routes down the field, who's 5th worst in separation. He calls it the average separation score, or ASS. I don't think I need to spell that out. At least it's a little kind of joke that I think they put in there, but he's fifth worst. As far as when you're talking about a vertical threat coming out of college, it was like, oh yeah, Malik Neighbors, vertical threat. Guy can get downfield, get open. We saw Marv also be able to get used as a vertical threat, but that wasn't really like his game. It's like what we'd say when the Cardinals acquired DeAndre Hopkins. Let's say they said, hey, we added DeAndre Hopkins. You'd be like, cool, all right, so we're going to have some routes outside, these comeback routes, like you're talking about these timing routes where boom, he gets open, boom, comes back out of bounds, about 8 or 9 yards down the field. Now you've got 3rd and 2 after you run it for no gain. You're like, perfect. That's exactly the type of usage you should have. You move him into the slot. You've even seen that there's times where with the Cardinals, they used him as a deep threat because they were able to find plays with that safety, lack of safety over the top, hit that cover to hole, or just recognize, hey, he's a guy who's got great hops, the pun not intended. And as far as his ability to get the ball at the catch point, throw it to him for the most part like that one on the line. Make sure that he goes up and is able to get it. You'll be able to have him be kind of that all-around receiver. But you're not going to just look at him and say, Hopkins, we're going to run you, at least for the most part, for the deep coverage, you take that safety away. And if he kind of comes down to the box, we'll hit you over the top. The Cardinals, when they've run any play that is not one of those post routes, so like a deep route, I think it's Marvin Harrison Jr. has been like in the top 5 or top 10 as far as for getting separation. So it's like, hey, you remember that game 2, at least against the Rams? You know, he had that one where Marv kind of ran up at least the sideline and then had an actual crossing route across the field. Yeah, like he gets separation on those. He's got awareness, even in that game where he was able to kind of get upfield and then flip his hips, get around when Kyler Murray was running away just on a broken play. It's like, yeah, that's one of those plays where he's not just having to run a post route. He's kind of just having to play a little bit of backyard football with his QB. What we're going to be able to see is that a lot of what Arizona has done is said, we're going to run Marvin on 1 out of every 4 routes. He's going to be outside. We're running him down the field. That's going to open up stuff underneath for a likes of Trey McBride, for some of our slot guys. And then if all of that coverage is going to be back, hit that check down to James Conner. He breaks a tackle, can run up. As a result of how Drew Petzing's offense is working, they're not targeting Marvin Harrison Jr. on those deep plays as far as making him a focal point. They're not even making as far as the focal point using him in a 3-dimensional place of kind of some of those like plays. We did see a really nice, I think it was the second drive of the game, there was like a nice actual slant route that he was able to run and pick up for a first down. But the term that's been floating around has been kind of been a sacrificial X receiver. And this is what I noticed back in week 1. I looked over and saw, why is Marvin Harrison Jr. not got that many catches? Put on the tape, and I looked and went, okay, there's nothing that's really changed about that position because they were having him run the same routes that Zach Pascal ran last year, running the same sort of essentially like you're taking away the deep safety to free up guys underneath. The fact that and it feels like this is kind of the case, Marcos, it feels like the Cardinals, the way that they want to run their offense and where their needs were at, I think everyone agreed they needed a number 1 wide receiver. But the way that their offense has been kind of built, they really probably needed a right tackle in a lot of different ways because Kyler, what I've seen for the most part, has been those plays are not developing because of time. And so you're going to say, hey, Kyler, you're going to stand back in the pocket. Kelvin Beachum in an obvious passing situation or on that play fake is not able to kind of hold up one-on-ones. You got to kind of either get a tight end over there. You're now going to be having essentially, a little bit of issues without Will Hernandez at the right guard spot. The protections have just not been quite holding up. And so what that means is that there's not as much time to throw that you're going to get if you're Kyler Murray. You have to hold back there, and you're either going to have to complete that deep pass and take a big hit because guys are getting beat so frequently, or you're going to have to say, look, we probably have these plays. Guys are getting open, but it's happening so late in the play, like Kurt Warner is saying, that you have to say Kyler's either going to get killed back here or he's going to be able to like do what he does best and be able to kind of move on the run, see if he can make something happen with his legs and play backyard football. And I think that in that case, Marcos, it still feels like the design of this offense under Drew Petzing does not feel like it's matching up. And it's not just for one specific reason. I think if there's one tweak, it'd be the deeper routes. The routes are just taking too long for guys to be able to get open. Some of that's on the receiver. Some of that I think is the design of Petzing's offense. And that's an easy way to be able to adjust. And so far we haven't seen it. Fortunately, when the Cardinals rushing attack has been firing on all cylinders like it did this game, it's kind of not mattered. It's been something we can at least say that they've been able to go out and be competitive week after week. And as a Cardinals fan, what you really want to see sitting in that stadium is being able to see your team go and get that win, be able to taunt Chargers fans after the game in the parking lot, and be able to feel good going into the next week. And that's something that we can say they had not felt like that at the end of the 2022 season. Did not feel like that in the Steve Wilkes season. What we're at least seeing with this Jonathan Gannon team is that Nick Rallis is probably going to be dead when he gets to that spot. And the Arizona is at least in a spot where they can hang in games offensively and have some adapting. We just haven't seen it consistently.
Well, people were speaking about like they wanted to see Kyler Murray in a traditional offense. There's one thing that I noticed is missing in this offensive scheme that was called on a few occasions last year that I don't know why this doesn't happen. So I think the timing based situation has more so to do with the fact that like you have to time routes differently, and you have to scheme yourself differently when you're dealing with the quarterback like Kyler Murray, because of the fact that like if his vision starts getting skewed because you're starting to get more like push by your front. That's why I always advocate for strengthening the middle of the field, because you need them to be able to hold on their blocks to give them a better chance of being able to see, like to be able to have vision down the field. Here's my concern. Here's my question. And then after this, I'm going to bring up the play I just put up, because I got to give you kudos on what you said about Max Melton. So here's my question. Where are the concepts where you move the launch point? That's something that has been a thing in these type of offenses that does get called up. Not very often, because you're not going to see this happen constantly, because you can be setting up your QB to get sacked or take a big hit. But moving the launch point has not been part of this offense of this year. I don't think I can't recall one play where they call this design where you have to have a running back right next to you in the shotgun. You fake the handoff, you move the launch point, you turn your hips, and then you hit somebody downfield. It's so effective because you can see people getting open on the crossers, which you could have two people now running those crossers. You have Marvin on one side, you have Michael Wilson on the other side. Michael Wilson caught both of those balls last year that I can recall on those crossing routes when they moved the launch point. Why aren't they doing that with Kyler Murray? I mean, you can get him open on naked boots. That's what they've been doing. They've been getting him open, but he has to throw on the run on those. Moving the launch
and
point
sometimes the Chargers did a good job. Their defensive coordinator, there's 2 or 3 times that they ran some of those naked bootlegs, and they had a guy who was covering Kyler Murray. Like, remember Vance Joseph with, I think it was the Rams game on the sideline for the Cardinals Hard Knocks, where he's like, we talked about the boot. And you're like, yeah, you talked about the boot, but like in the design of how their defense worked, they actually had someone accounting for the boot within the Chargers defense, to the point where there was at least once that Kyler like had to kind of make a play, try to run. Once I think he threw it away. But that was something I noticed was I'm like, the design that they have, they're familiar enough with Drew Petzing's play calls that they could see and have the bootleg accounted for, which some teams have not been able to because of their issues to stop the run. Here, the Chargers, they had a good enough balance on defense where it really did feel like this was a game where I looked at both offensive coordinators and said, gosh, like Cardinals, you probably could have a better functioning offense if Kyler had a bit more time in the pocket to like see the field, read it, didn't have to run as much, was able to have some of these guys pushed back. But also you saw with Justin Herbert, they had those 2 tackles. They didn't have a receiver. I know a lot of Cardinals fans have said, build the line. Some people did not want Marvin this year. Marvin hasn't lived up to the expectations I think that we've had for him. But the Chargers, you can take a look and say this would have been the alternative, was both of those tackles were playing. You saw that Justin Herbert still was under pressure. The interior was a big part of that. There was even still times where the edge rush got to him because he just was taking so long because he couldn't get the ball to anyone. Offense in the NFL and defense in the NFL, Marcos, I think are 2 sides of the same coin. You're only as strong as like some of your weakest links. And as a result, you have to play effectively as a team between all of the different pieces to get the most out of it. We saw Arizona defensively as a team. When the ball got into the red zone, the Chargers did not have some of these play calls to be able to move the ball forward outside of just running the ball. And Arizona was able to take advantage of that. Whereas on Arizona's side, they had some long scores, but were effectively able to hold the Chargers to field goals. Whereas on Arizona's side, they drive down the field. Marvin Harrison Jr. kind of pulls the safety away. Greg Dortch runs underneath on the design route, catches a touchdown. That ended up being a huge difference in the game, was the fact the Cardinals were able to get 7 points at a spot where the Chargers were only able to get 3. And at the end of the game, it meant Arizona didn't have to go for a touchdown. They just were able to get down the field, kick a quick field goal, and win the game. It's not to say like, oh, this is right that's the wrong pick. It's just more to say that this is where you are as a team, is that you're going to need effective receivers, effective pass blocking. You're going to need guys who can get pressure on the quarterback up the interior. And we'll talk a bit about if that's going to be possible against the Miami Dolphins this week. And it really does kind of at least show that it's not just a coaching thing in the NFL, but talent and how you're going to utilize that talent does really ultimately matter. And I think in this game, Arizona ultimately was able to win because their defense was a step ahead and because the Kyler Murray was able to make enough plays with his legs. James Conner was able to be a star, not just an 11 carry for 40 yards kind of player that J.K. Dobbins was in this game. That was the difference.
You're not backing out on the what's I'm gonna call it. You're not backing out on the Marvin Harrison pick, are you? Because I do believe
no, I think you double down on some of those here, at least for the most part. You take a look at how bad it's been for Herbert's receivers. You're like, Arizona at least has been capable at receiver. It just hasn't turned out the way you wanted to. But in that system with Greg Roman, like, there's just no question that it's not good as far as with receiving. And I think, unfortunately, what we can say with Arizona is if you probably took James Conner from one team, put him on the other side, is that enough that you probably say the Chargers win? I think there's a good argument that, yeah, and maybe we can talk more about James Conner as like he's going to pass up David Johnson probably this week with like about 100 yards of rushing. He's probably going to pass him up as far as 10th most rushing for Cardinals players, which seems crazy. But remember, DJ's his entire career with Arizona kind of just went through 2016 to 2020, and James Conner's been here since 2021. He just has been more effective overall as a rusher than DJ has been. He's missed probably a couple of games, but we were talking about a guy who, at least for the most part, seems like he's on path. If he gets another contract and plays at this level for 2 more years, he's probably a Ring of Honor type of player, as weird as it is to talk about. He's for sure, at least in that, never have to pay for a drink at any bar in Arizona again. Like, he walks into a place, everyone's like, James Conner, all right, here, this one's on the house for you. It's definitely crazy that we're talking about some of these places, and you've got a guy in Marvin Harrison Jr. who he's not been atrocious this season. He's still got 20 catches for 300 yards, but at the end of the day, it's like he's averaging about 21 yards per catch because they're just using him downfield so much when he does get it. It's done like these kind of big 50-50 plays. It's really weird overall to talk about how you're only getting him probably about, it's about 20, I think was it 20 catches for 300 yards. Gosh, you're only talking probably about like 15, what is it, Marcos? Like 15 yards a game or something like ridiculous.
Something around that.
That's not what you draft him at number 4 to do. We've even seen in the Rams game that when you do actually utilize him, granted, much better corner that he played at least against there, that he can be able to actually, it's kind of like talked about with Kyler and Cliff, like you got to do quick completions, get him into a rhythm. We see Cliff Kingsbury try to do this, but often to be like, oh, we're throwing a quick bubble screen, get Kyler into a rhythm, you start it behind the sticks. And when it came to like those third down plays, just wasn't able to pass protect with 5 guys against 4 rushers. It kind of came down to Kyler's legs or being able to just get the ball to DeAndre Hopkins beating someone. This offensive structure can't continue, I think, the way that it has been, Marcos.
That's it. That is why, like, you got a DeAndre Hopkins for it. It's because of those third downs, and that is why you're getting a Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm not gonna fault him on what he's doing because he's taking his routes and he's doing the max that he can, and he's at least presenting himself as a target. But they are moving him around all over the field and stuff, and sometimes you're going to be moved in a concept where you're not going to be the number 1 guy, but that was the big thing about DeAndre Hopkins with Cliff Kingsbury. He was the alert guy. He was the guy that was one-on-one on the outside on one side. And I thought to myself, maybe that's where you have to go with him. Maybe that's what you just got to do. Maybe you just keep him as the alert. Keep him as the alert so he can be the safety blanket, because I'm not going to excuse the drops that he's had. He has had quite a bit of drops that, like, I would say, okay, you know what, that one's fine. I don't fault him for dropping that one. But there are some where he does have like the catch at the end of the game. He jumped on that one. He shouldn't have jumped. He jumped on that.
It's one of those spots of, like, we talk about with Andy Isabella had an issue at least with being a body catcher. Now, what's interesting too is, like, you'll see some of that in college with trying to box out. We'll also see, like, some of those catches, you don't have to jump for it. But then you also look at the next thing on the play. He had a guy that basically is like spearheading him. So he's like, I'm going to jump up here for the most part because I know where the two guys are at. If I get like speared in the ribs for the most part, it was kind of one of those areas where you're like,
You think
you
it was a
shouldn't drop that
business
ball.
decision?
They get an extra 15 yards. I don't think it was a business decision for dropping it. I think that it was a focused drop, which we see happen where you know you're going to get lit up, and you can say that it doesn't have an effect or shouldn't have an effect on you, but it still can. And I think that's one thing with Marv is a little different too, is like a Larry Fitzgerald had the ability to essentially, like, he knew he was going to get lit up. He would take a lot of those different hits for that one. He was a larger size. Marv's a bit slimmer, but they also were in a place where they were like, hey, like, with how offenses functioned back then versus where they're functioning now, there was a lot more where they would essentially just run the ball, at least for the most part, with the middle more fullbacks for the most part. So then you could have a receiver downfield, but like you're throwing to the middle of the field, you got safety here running with him, and Larry's able to run over and just kind of outbox the guy and jump for it. It's not going to be the same as now you're having to go in these intermediate areas and intermediate zones where you've got a safety over the top here, a corner in coverage here, and because of the way the play moved, the linebacker moved this way, and he's going to just run back into you because he's going to essentially be in coverage in front so that Kyler Murray is not going to be able to sprint off for, another 30 or so yards down the field. I think that it's a place where, yes, he does need to kind of improve, but we're also in a spot where we can say, look, like, the coaching he's getting is probably not that good. He probably got better coaching at Ohio State. And you're trying to develop a player in some of these areas where he can be able to grow and get more involved. And we've not seen them be able to actually, like, the way to put it at least is, and I've seen people have talked about this before, it's like there's kids, they get their driver's license. They have my super sweet 16, whatever you want to call it. How many of those dads will buy their kid on their 16th birthday like a freaking Mazda or like even higher cars? Lamborghini comes to mind or something like that versus, hey, it's your first car. We're going to get you one that's going to just be a simple automatic where you just turn the car on, gets you from point A to point B. Maybe it's a nicer car or a newer car, but you don't need to have that sports car because you're not going to go out drag racing in like the salt flats because you just turned 16, just got your license. You're going to have to be able to learn, right? It feels a lot like with Drew Petzing. He's given a Marvin Harrison Jr. type of Lamborghini, and his results have been, all right, here's how things are going to work. On Mondays, I'll go to the store. So I'm going to drive it up over to the store, go to the local Walmart or Target or something like that, get the groceries, come back for the most part. And a lot of people are looking at saying, yeah, I mean, you're using the car, that's for sure, but you're going to really spend that much and be able to use the car for going to the grocery store? And I think that's where a lot of people then say, well, he's like, well, in my offense, the way it works, we get the ball to everyone. I got to drive to the grocery store. I got to drive to the racetrack. I got to, drive on the freeway to go to work. All of these are kind of areas where you have to be able to, I think, as a coach, be able to instill both I guess you can say like a culture, being able to say, this is how we win, being able to prove it, and then having guys be able to adjust to that culture. But you also have to play to their strengths as well. And it has me thinking, Marcos, at this point, with everything Kurt Warner's gone through, that a lot of people are looking and saying, hey, maybe this is a Kyler Murray issue. And I say, okay, if it is, you probably need to trade Kyler, go out, get a veteran quarterback who maybe you think will take some of these hits, run the offense, maybe won't hit some of those checkdowns or some of the design plays. And then the problem with that ultimately, though, is unless you actually see that offense be able to pick up or go through or go forward, and it's like, oh, it turns out like having a shorter quarterback, here's the offense that we're running, we know we can win with this. It's just there's too many limitations. That isn't going to get you very far if you're going to be so dependent on that it's going to change, especially when Kyler, he's still at least throwing the ball well. He hasn't kind of hit that 33-year-old Russell Wilson phase yet where you're like, oh, this guy looks like he's cooked. Like, I think that a lot of this ultimately, people are being more aware of Drew Petzing, and we're starting to see some of these limitations despite having pretty decent offense. And, maybe some of that will change. Maybe Jonah Williams comes back and suddenly the rushing offense is much more effective. We end up seeing at least some of these routes taking longer to get open, but then Kyler's got more time. It could be that it's just small little changes we see could make a huge impact. And at the same time, Marcos, the fact we haven't seen some of those small changes is probably worrying for Cardinals fans because Lord knows we've seen Nick Rallis with, it's like was the one line from Marvel. It's like, Tony Stark built this in a cave with a box of scraps. It's like Dennis Gardeck's out for the year. Roy Lopez isn't playing on Sunday. Nick Rallis is coaching the heck out of this unit that's undermanned and is really getting by with just a couple of guys who are playing solid in coverage, and Garrett Williams having, I don't know if it's a career year just yet, but looking like a huge hit at the draft position.
Yeah, the thing with Garrett Williams is kind of I think I would want to push him to the outside now, but he's playing in the slot, and I know that, you know, when you're playing well in your position, you're doing your job really well. They don't want to move you from that, so it kind of sucks in that perspective. But yeah, I'm not gonna disagree with which one of these two coordinators is having themselves a better year, and I think, you know, for some of the things that I don't like that they do on defense, it is kind of hard to do it with the unit that you have, because you have young talent trying to find their way to where they need to be at, and you don't know what you have in any of these players. We still don't even know what we have in Robinson, because we haven't gotten much film on him.
Yeah.
And
he hasn't played yet. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, like he has every right to take as much time as he wants in this circumstance and whatnot. And I'm sorry for what happened to him, but we don't know what we have basically in this whole unit if they're all healthy, because that is the thing. Not all of our players are healthy, and not all of them are out there. On offense, though, like, my issue with trying to move off of Drew Petzing is, what are you going to do? Are you going to go, you know, kind of step back to like what you saw with Cliff, or are you going to, because there's really three prototypical type of offenses. You have like the air raidy type of offense that's like take everything underneath, keep the ball moving no matter what, like the Kansas City Chiefs kind of do themselves. Or you have the Kyle Shanahan
with a lot of power run games. Like, they'll do a lot of under center power run games as well, that I've noticed at least. And this year they weren't able to do that. They've really been able to adjust by kind of keeping things close, being able to run the ball, having fewer possessions, letting their defense kind of be able to limit teams. And then late in games, close enough, Pat Mahomes, they'll dial up some of these like gotta have it plays and be able to walk out of there with a win. That's kind of how Arizona's game script is, but the issue is we're all looking at that going, but then their defense is not the Kansas City Chiefs defense. It's not a Super Bowl winning defense. Like, the identities are just flip-flopped. It's very strange. And I think a lot of that gets summed up by where I felt, at least as far as an individual and a fan and an analyst, different from a lot of other fans, was the 3rd down and 4th down play calls. There's a time that Gannon punted. I think it was either on 4th and 2 or 4th and 1. They're able to pin the Chargers relatively deep, but it did feel like if you'd gone for it, handed the ball off to James Conner, get a yard or two, you're probably going to be in good space to then at least get 3 more points versus punting. But on that play call, a lot of fans were just frustrated because here Kyler Murray comes off the field, Clayton Tune comes on, is probably about 3rd and maybe a foot or two for the most part. It's like about 3rd and less than a yard. They bring in Clayton Tune for the tush push, and this is something that's been interesting because I've even said in past weeks, I said, hey, look, you had a 4th and 1, you punted. Hand the ball to James Conner, heck, even bring in Clayton Tune to be like your designated tush push guy, because what we've seen with that play is when you're able to execute it well, you basically are able to pick up 1 yard. If you don't pick it up the first time, you pick it up the second. So I was sitting there and he went 3rd and 1, Clayton Tune, tush push, and they didn't get it. And I think maybe you can say the spot was off or the refs were having issues. Like, there was a lot of flags that flew around in that game. And I was like, okay, like, run it again, figure out what's going on with it. Like, figure out why they blocked you the first time, run it a second time, be able to know, oh, hey, this guy, he dove super low down over here, so they could get leverage so that when we tried to get that quarterback over the top of him through like that hole, couldn't get there. Cool. You can now at least say, all right, let's come back here for the most part. We'll be able to send in something to the headset, at least with all of that, to be able to say, hey, we can take a timeout if we need to. We can, be able to figure out what went wrong, have the players be able to say, they're like, hey, he's going down low. All right, so here, we'll go in this spot here, having that adjustment. Instead, they run the same play again, gets the same results. Like, they get stopped short. Chargers take over. A lot of fans were just like, why would you take Kyler Murray off the field, James Conner off the field? I think we maybe undersell some of the fact that last year when we saw the Cardinals do this with Josh Dobbs, he probably, as far as a rushing and a running quarterback and being able to have some of that physical ability, like, you're missing a Will Hernandez out there, obviously. It did seem kind of where I'm like, hey, I'm fine with running it again. But then after the fact, it's kind of like, you're like, hey, so I'm going to drink this cup of coffee, and then I'm going to get the work done. But just to make sure, I'm going to drink a second cup of coffee. And then you're just like, I've got the jitters. I cannot focus. This is a bad idea. It's like, yeah, on the backside now I can see it. But at the time, it's easy to say, like, you know what? On 3rd and 1, hand the ball off to James Conner. have a play that's designed to pick up at least 4 to 5 yards, maybe fake like you're running up the middle, have one of those kind of scrape exchanges where he's able to kind of pick up some yards, beat a guy to the edge, knowing if he gets back to the line, you're at 4th and 1, you can either run it with him again, then you could bring in the knowing that this is kind of a make it or go type of a thing versus running the same play twice. And so fans were just really upset at Drew Petzing running the same play twice. I said, hey, I was fine with it. But in hindsight, yeah, you know what? Run James Conner on that 3rd and 1, get a play that's running him at least through the contact up the middle, gives him a chance for it. You get close enough, you can then just say, all right, we can QB for the most part like that one. Run this tush push. The fact that they ran the tush push twice, didn't seem to make adjustments, just felt like it was a spot where some people said getting out coached. Some people were like, well, the analytics say that it's probably better to go for it, Marcos. To me, it just felt like it was one of those symptoms where the Cardinals are just probably a step away, needing to get another backup who's designated, getting something in there that's a different play. It just felt like it was one of these little small things, a little detail, but we just have not seen the Cardinals been able to get some of those details right consistently enough where they're able to win against teams, or like we saw in week 2 against the Rams, blow teams out when they have the advantage.
Yeah, on that, I'm not so big on that like back-to-back tush push thing, because I did think to myself after they didn't get it the first time, I'm like, run it again, because of the effectiveness that it has. And unfortunately, they went ahead and just threw that out the window. And of course, after that fails, and it's back-to-back consecutive times, we're like right here, like we're doing our thing. We're like, why'd you call that? Like, of course, you have James Conner in the backfield. I mean, I'm going to go ahead and say what Kyler Murray said in the first game of the season when they called that they did that handoff on 3rd and 10. People were getting mad and stuff. Kyler Murray said, well, you guys wouldn't be talking about it if it worked. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't live in an alternate universe. But yeah, hindsight will tell us, man, that was not a very good decision. So the good thing is that on defense, they were able to like not allow them to capitalize. And let me go ahead and put this play up here for you. Yeah. So this one right here is the big beast breakup by Max Melton. I wanted to highlight this because, as you know, I wasn't a big Max Melton person. I thought to myself, okay, that was a reach by the Cardinals. That was way too deep. I think it was like a panic pick because they moved back and then 3 defensive backs went when they moved back. And I thought to myself, oh, look, they lost out of, I think it was Cooper DeJean and Kool-Aid McKinstry at that time.
McKinstry's the one, I think, because a lot of people had said that DeJean was going to be a corner. I looked at him as a safety once I dug into part of it was like I watched, he did not run the 3-cone drill. And when you watch him on tape, he just seems like he was a very vertical player. Like he was actually reminded me a little bit of Isaiah Simmons if they had put him into like that safety
smaller body
up front. Yeah, and a smaller body, like you said, too, and a little bit, but also it's just he looks like more of a defensive back. We'll see how DeJean turns out as far as within coverage, but like you said, it was a Kool-Aid McKinstry versus Max Melton type of thing. Cardinals were able to get Max Melton another pick. It was like you said, there was a penalty we saw from Melton here. He's a bit grabby. We saw there was a drop where he got beaten by the likes of Ladd McConkey. But here, like you said, on this play, he essentially has the athleticism, breaks back, stays with him, breaks in front of the ball, gets the pass breakup. And it's a beautiful, beautiful play, like you said, at least for the most part, that essentially I think that drive ended in a Chargers punt, unless I'm mistaken, at least. And part of it was because they were still that much behind the sticks.
I'm not sure, but this could be the 3rd down play. Of course, I'm showing the cut up clip and stuff, and this is from a Pro Premium, which, you know, if you guys have an NFL, you know, premium pass or whatnot and everything like that, this website is so good. It has the search bar back. So I would recommend that you guys, if you guys are doing film study or you guys are checking out like certain clips about one certain player, just go ahead and check that out. But this was something that I wanted to pull up because on this play itself, you're seeing him, and let me see what kind of call this is first before I even start, you know, talking. Looks like quarters to me. The only reason why I think it's quarters is because you have the, you know, the obvious too high with the corners on the side. This is a condensed formation, so they have to come in a little bit closer to each other. But he's keeping his eyes on the quarterback. He looks down to the wide receiver, sees him, sees his hips, which the hips tell everything. You know, they say hips don't lie. Once he sees his hips kind of change, like direction, he's now focusing on the wide receiver, because if this is going to be something like an out route, which it ended up being an out route, if he's aggressive, he plants his foot, he gets on this break, he's going to be able to get a break on the ball. Obviously, if he's even faster than that, which I'm not going to fault him for. That's an interception. That's what the comeback route interception.
And that's part of the coverage, like you said, too, is you also have seen at other times, like, and this is the thing I remember about Brandon Williams when he was in coverage. He would do very well at being able to cover the out routes. Where he would struggle was he would play the out routes close, like you said, being able to look for getting the ball or looking to play close coverage. If Ladd McConkey goes up on that play and all of a sudden whips around and turns it into a go route, where essentially he runs an out route, fakes it, and then runs upfield, you've got to be able to have the separation where you can recover from that. And the fact that, like you said, Melton plays it perfectly. You can even see on the play where he's diving for the ball. If McConkey turns upfield, he's in position to stay with him and make the tackle there. It's not like it's a blown coverage. Like, it was one of those places of where I was like watching the replay and you're like, oh yeah, that's like a natural corner right there. Like, he understands where some of that leverage is to play, where that it doesn't matter which way McConkey goes. You know that he's going to get covered. Even if it's like a perfect throw to the perfect place, you're going to get tackled right away and limit as much of that explosion. Versus, like you said, you gamble, you jump on the route quickly. Turns out that then he all of a sudden gets flips his hips and then is just able to be gone upfield. It was one of those places where you're like, okay, Garrett Williams has been impressive. Max Melton's coming along. Maybe the Cardinals don't have a true number one corner, at least. Maybe Garrett Williams is becoming that slowly but surely. Maybe you don't need a number one corner. And this is like Jonathan Gannon gets his two veteran defensive guys that Super Bowl run with like a Darius Slay and then Bradbury on the other side. Like, if you can have that for the most part, don't need to have a Sauce Gardner or a Patrick Peterson. You can then put a lot of the investing into some of those guys at the defensive line. It's a spot where, Marcos, the more that we talk about this team, there's frustrations for fans right now. I think that some fans at 3-4 are like, okay, like, beat the Dolphins, then I'll be at least like content, go out, get to 4-4. But I've seen a lot from these young players where it tells me that it feels like the Cardinals, it's not like we're sitting back there and being like, okay, on the defensive side, you've got this guy's out of place, this guy's here. It just feels like the defense, things are there. They're finding guys, they're finding talent. It's how they're utilized on offense. Like, hey, unless your name's James Conner, we're probably seeing some areas that they could improve. Or Paris Johnson, I should say, too. He had a good game when they matched up, at least. He didn't have to play Khalil Mack for most of the game. But after a while, they matched up Khalil Mack on him. He did a good enough job handling. They just flipped him onto Kelvin Beacham's side, essentially. They said, we got a better shot of going through Beacham to be able to get pressure onto Murray. And credit the Chargers, they really did. He made an impact in the game, just didn't make that game-ending impact until after Arizona forced that fumble back to their side.
Yeah. And I keep replaying this part over here because this is the classic double mugs that Van Joseph used to call. So I believe this is usually a third down call. You
Chris
call
Barnes,
this because
passing play. Yeah.
You call this because you want to try to like pressure the quarterback and have him change which direction he's gonna, pass protect and whatnot. And then you see both linebackers dropping into their underneath hook zones. Seen this play a billion times from Vance Joseph with Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins, and name Jordan Hicks, and name whatever other linebacker we had, Devondre Campbell, where they're lining up at the double mugs and they threaten to blitz, and they don't blitz at the very end. They just gonna drop their people into their zones, and then that's it. Look at the push that Mac Wilson gets on Joe Alto. Like, that's what I was looking at. Isn't that like beautiful right there? He kind of gets himself a little bit into like a pressure position. He throws
his hand up, gets all of that there. Yep, it's great.
That's that right there is just like, look at Joe Alt just getting pushed back by one of our defenders. Of course, he drops the anchor on him, but he had to time that jump, and when he did that, that's obviously when he.
It's when you play the wide edges, like that's the Hassan Reddick role in Jonathan Gannon's defense, is being able to have that speed to power conversion. And like you said, the linebackers in this game did play like out of their mind, as far as like you saw, like with Kaiser White and Chris Barnes were there. They did an excellent job, and they were able to use Mac Wilson, both an inside linebacker and when he was able to kind of rush off the edge. The thing that they are going to miss, unfortunately, at least, and this is where we can transition into previewing some of next week's game, is Dennis Gardeck is officially out for the season, tore his ACL. I believe it's the third time he's had an ACL tear. He had one previously a couple of years ago that I think was partially torn. I believe there was one either in college or maybe I have to remember exactly where it was. So it's unfortunate because he's basically been like the guy who's gotten the most sacks, I think, so far this season. But what we've seen is the Arizona, they've been able to get interior pressure. They've had, I think, 14 sacks on the season. This is remarked on in the Rise Up See Red podcast that was a former site writer Seth Cox and then Just Root, who works for CardsWire, also talked about that 6 of their 14 sacks are coming from the interior. Now, with Dennis Gardeck out, they're going to have to find someone to step up. But also for this upcoming game against the Dolphins, Roy Lopez, who I believe had a couple of sacks so far, he's been probably their best and maybe most consistent defensive lineman. He's out for this upcoming game as well. They're going up then against a Dolphins team that basically has put about pressure about half the time. It's like 43.6% of the time. They put pressure on the opposing quarterbacks. They have the quickest average time to pressure at 2.46 seconds. So you're like, all right, this is Dolphins getting back Tua. They have obviously the field stretchers and Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. No one's been able to get them the ball. Tyler Huntley got hurt. Skylar Thompson came in. Looks like at least that they've had some offensive line issues and injuries. But Arizona hasn't as much had a defensive line. The question I think, Marcos, here is, are you able to get pressure onto Tua enough and limit their essentially offense where the offense hasn't been great? Like, it seems like the book has been out and their head coach, Mike McDaniel, has to adjust some, because even when Tua was in and playing for the first, I think, week and a half of the season, that was not the same impressive offense and did not look like that team that ran the ball for like 200 yards, scored 70 points on the Broncos, did not look like the team that was leading the league in passing with Tua Tagovailoa. It just looked different. And part of that makes me think that the offensive line is just not really set there like it was last year. But that defense, they've been very good. You've got Jalen Ramsey as the corner on that team. He's going to line up against Marvin Harrison Jr. Calais Campbell is still making plays at 38 years old. One of their better starters on the defensive side is also going to be out for this game for the Dolphins. So I think it really kind of comes down to this, Marcos, is you're not going to be playing a heavy run, I should say passing. Let me rephrase that. You're not going to be playing a run the football type of team like the Chargers that doesn't have receivers. You're going to be playing a run the football team that has receivers and just got Tua back. On the defensive side, you've got guys who are at least strong up front. You're probably going to have to run the ball with James Conner and Kyler Murray and be able to find ways to get Jalen Ramsey onto the Greg Dortch or Michael Wilson to be able to utilize that. And again, going back to Trey McBride, he, I think, led the team with 50 yards receiving in a very low-scoring game. I think that this is going to have an opportunity for, if the Cardinals are going to win this game, they're going to have to not just play the game plan they played last week, have a couple of different changes and adjustments. And at the end of the day, Marcos, they're going to have to recognize that we're going to have to just take who we have on defense, go out there again. Cardinals are missing, I think they're starting 4 defensive linemen, and they're missing 2 of their top 3 edge rushers. Like, this is maybe at this point almost a curse for this position for the defensive line. They've still been producing, but we'll have to see how it works out on Sunday, because I think that you can lose this game if you're Arizona, come back and get to 4-5 with the win against the Bears. What you really are hoping for, I think, is you go in, get a win 4-4, get a bit healthier. Maybe they're limited with Tua just coming back off. Things are a bit rusty. Be able to go out against the Bears and at least have an opportunity to get back to a winning record, knowing that the rest of your schedule is pretty much going to be a lot easier. Any comments for you when looking at the Dolphins game, which is, I believe, an early time start, at least for the 10 a.m. Arizona start, 1 p.m. Eastern time? We've seen in the past Arizona would struggle with these starting times. We haven't seen it as much under Gannon, but we just haven't seen the team be able to have some consistently winning games. They just have not won back-to-back games for a couple of years.
Yeah, I'm glad it's an early start. I like early starts because I like to watch the game sooner. Yeah, I don't know if it's the struggle because of like the timeline and them having to go out there, but it is kind of something that I believe if we look into, like, it'd be an interesting stat to see what the record is in the East Coast, because in the East Coast, they obviously start sooner than what they are used to when they're playing here. They're playing on the West Coast, but being an early game as well, that's interesting. That's something I want to look into, actually, now that I think about it. But like like they're having their struggles too. The Dolphins are having their issues as well. They don't have the best offensive line, unit out there. Without Tua, this team just kind of like collapses. Even with Tua, they were just having some issues, and I'm kind of afraid that when he gets brought down next time, that something major is going to happen to Tua. So I'm not sure if this is even like something that he want to risk. But this team isn't that if they have an opportunity to win 2 games in a row or win back-to-back games, this has to be it. Getting to 500 should be like what this team should be striving for, because after that, that's when we start looking at building on top of that. So
Yes.
to me, I don't care about Jalen Ramsey in the secondary. I don't care about what's going on with the interior. Defense is good. So you are going to have your hands full with that. And we have ex-Cardinal Calais Campbell, who I keep thinking to myself, why aren't the Cardinals trying to bring him back year after year? You have him. He's helping this unit out. So one way or another, you're going to have to beat him in the air. But you also have to.
I'll say this, Marcos. If the Dolphins lose this game, their season's basically going to be over. Like, they're hoping that Tua can come back, but at some point, where I think they've got 1 win at this point, you're just not going to be able to make it back in the playoffs, considering the fact that the Jets are going to have all this talent pushing for a playoff spot. The AFC North still looks like to be competitive. Even within I will say it's like the AFC East, which is the division that, but those 2 teams, the Patriots have looked miserable. You may have a shot to come back. It's going to be really hard to beat the Jets and the Bills when you're Miami. Like, you're at that point going to say, hey, do we really need like a Calais Campbell versus like being able to grab another draft pick next year so that we can just say this wasn't our year? We'll try to compete and contend, still keep Tua upright, like see what we have the rest of the year. Because if he still struggles, there's still issues. Even if there is another spot, like you said, I kind of don't want him almost to come back, at least just for his own sake and safety. But it's just, that's part of, unfortunately, the job that people are taking on, of it being a difficult and physical sport. So let's go over our game predictions, at least for each of those areas. I think what we've seen with Arizona this year for the trend is they'll usually have a close, gutsy, emotional win followed by they just are out of sorts. The other team has come in, blah. The good news, though, is that when you take a look at this season, how it's gone, they've played playoff team. Rams all of a sudden looked like they caught them when they had no Puka, no Cooper Kupp. They went out and beat the Vikings, at least gave them their second loss of the season. They don't seem like they're going to be selling. That defense would probably be a little better with all those rookies by the end of the season. They look like they're going to be competing hard. The Lions seem like that they're going to probably be a Super Bowl caliber team, is what it seems to be. A lot of these teams where they kind of have fallen flat on really comes down to the Commanders. They fell flat on after that hard-fought Lions game, and the Packers game they fell flat on. I don't think that the Dolphins, from what we've seen so far, are at the Packers level or they're at the Commanders level. And maybe we're wrong, and it shows up to us there. They just are able to get a strong run game going. Guys are just getting open against the secondary with some of that zone coverage. Maybe that's the case. I think this could be a competitive type of game. I don't really want to think that you can pick Arizona in some of these places, but part of me is just looking at these 2 teams and going, I think that this is one of those spots where we're going to come in, we're going to know at the end of the first quarter if Arizona's winning this game or not. I think that the Dolphins are hungrier for a win than Arizona is. I'll give them the edge. I've got this then as probably another low-scoring game. I think this could be a 20-18 Dolphins victory, but it wouldn't shock me if Arizona is able to take advantage with some of the scheme and some of the other issues, keep those guys, and that this offense for Miami just ends up struggling for the most part, and Arizona is able to continue. James Conner, I think, has had 100 yards rushing in, I think it's like 5 of the last 9 games. Last week was like the first player to have 100 yards rushing and 50 yards receiving and a forced fumble, because that was the kind of game it was for the most part. If you can kind of run the ball with James Conner, and then this was the week that we see, hey, we know how they're going to play some of these receivers, coming in with a new game plan, knowing that it's going to be such a quick passing game. We can't do these deep Marv routes. Like, we're going to have to adjust, be able to make sure that we can get some of these guys quicker, make it shorter, make sure if we're going to have one of those longer plays for the most part, they're going to blitz us quickly. We're going to make sure we can force a Trey McBride mismatch against a smaller defensive back, be able to run him on a deep route across the field, getting rid of that ball quick. Being able to take advantage of some of that too, with Kyler being able to run, I think will be good. Those are the areas I think we'll see Arizona being able to continue this trend of when James runs the ball, when Kyler's able to use that explosive running for a big play, when the defense is able to kind of essentially contain some of that run game, I think that would give Arizona the chance. The hard part in this one is if Tyreek or Jalen Waddle end up getting loose just for a little bit because the pass rush isn't good enough, that's where I think that we could see issues. What you want to make sure is that this isn't a blowout game again. You want to make sure that you're at least able to play the game on your terms and not the Dolphins. Marcos, what is your score prediction for the game?
I'm going to say 33-31, and I'm going to say 33-31
Mm.
Cardinals.
High
Because,
scoring.
yeah, high scoring. I believe it's going to be like that for both sides. And I think for the first time, hopefully, it's the first time this season. And
Bring back to back.
first time, yeah, back-to-back wins. That's what I'm hoping for. That's my hopeful pick. My reality pick is going to be probably like 21-17, I believe. And, Dolphins win. But my hopeful pick and what I want to predict and what I'm going to predict is 33-31.
Fantastic. Thank you guys again so much for joining in. At least this has been the Redbird Reboot podcast. For at Pen Queso, Marcos Labrado, I'm at Blake Murphy 7. Again, make sure you're following us on YouTube. Make sure that, of course, you're finding the show at least wherever you're listening to podcasts. We'll make sure that we have this up at least here tomorrow. Big game for Arizona. Can they get back to 500? Or are we going to talk about this as a team that wins one close one week and then loses the next? Will Marvin Harrison Jr. be able to get more than like 50 receiving yards? I mean, this is all good questions. But for now, at least, we've got a log out. But thankfully, up until then, the Cardinals rebooted fans' hopes with the win, and you've been rebooted as well on our podcast. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend.